you who perhaps just joined, this is Alan Schimmel, and I am the editor-in-chief of DevOps.com. Today's webinar is another in our continuing series of webinars on topics of interest to our audience. And today's webinar is the modern office, how Google Apps solves the IT identity crisis. Very happy to be today's webinar is sponsored by JumpCloud and Bitium, and of course brought to you by DevOps.com. Today's presenters are Greg Keller, who besides being Chief Product Officer at JumpCloud is actually a friend of mine, and Erik Gustavson. Oh, I'm going to mess up Erik's name, and I apologize. Erik Gustavson, he's the CTO of Bitium, and Erik, I apologize. I'm going to let you pronounce it correctly.
Sure.
And Erik will be presenting from Bitium today. With that being said, let me hand it over to Greg, who will be going over today's agenda, and we can go from there.
Alan, thanks so much, and my good friend Erik Gustavson is also on the line. And today I think you're going to walk away with some interesting tidbits, things to think about with your Google Apps infrastructure and your implementation. Generally speaking, what we're going to do is give you first a little history lesson. We're going to talk about some directory, like histories of directories. We're then going to look at how Google changed the game, and I'm sure that the majority of people on this call have, in large part, intimacy with Google Apps on not only their day-to-day use with the product within the enterprise, but quite frankly how it's changed collaboration, etc. But given that elegance that Google has provided the world on a fairly cost-effective and sort of modern way to collaborate with this set of tools and all the things that they bring to the table, there's still a number of things that have to be considered. And what we're going to do, both Erik and I, sort of illuminate those things that we feel companies with good to great security postures really need to consider as they're thinking about identity, and they're thinking about the security of that identity to all of their resources. And Erik and I will, as you'll see, fairly evenly and cleanly divide the world a bit in terms of what Google is and the layers that have to surround that infrastructure. So let's get going. So as mentioned, my role in this is to play in some part a history teacher for at least a minute or two. And what this will do is sort of level set the sort of entree of Google Apps over the last, since 2004, since they launched Gmail. And let's talk about that a little bit. So anyone on this call who has even the slightest tinge of gray hair, including myself, over the last 20 years doing software R&D, I've worked at a myriad companies that have had this piece of infrastructure that I know most of you have heard by name as the core of their IT network, and that is Active Directory. And 15 years ago, roughly, at least since the dawn of Windows Server 2000, when it introduced the concept of a domain controller, really set the standard, the gold standard, for centralization of an employee's identity. At that time, again, in the spirit of speaking historically, one vendor taught the world how to do a lot of things in terms of securing its enterprise and enabling a collaborative mechanism that started from the employee's computer or workstation, and that sort of rifled through everything from its collaboration tools like SharePoint through its office tools, and of course at the center of that was its communication vehicle, Exchange and Outlook. So everything was this incredibly tight, one directory backed source of identity. A single vendor could run an enterprise, and legions of young men and women became these MCSEs, these Microsoft certified systems engineers, and their career was set. They could institute a company and the backbone of a company all through this incredible piece of technology that Microsoft launched. Over the sort of span of that 15 years, countless vendors were building applications and anything from an ecosystem perspective that could tie itself or tether itself to this domain controller. And this is at a time when everything was sort of very on-prem and inside your firewall and frankly very neat and clean. Now let's mess all that up. What happened? Then, as I like to say, XaaS came, not Christmas, but XaaS. And you pick your as a service solution, infrastructure as a service, software as a service. And now as you're seeing companies like JumpCloud and Bitium and others, even Microsoft themselves pushing hard into this concept of identity as a service. But what this really did was explode and untether and decentralize this incredible elaborate world that Microsoft had created. And it caused a lot of stress, and still does, to those IT and sysadmins who are trying to maintain order and control. So what that did was decentralize identity. People could still log in on their network through VPN, on their Windows endpoints, but what happens when you introduce something like a Salesforce or an Amazon Web Services, these things that live up in the cloud, and they all require some new form of identity to log in and authenticate and then authorize the use of the employee on those things. Microsoft and Active Directory, in all of its elegance, was not prepared to do that. Even with their push into federated services, it simply was complicated and outside the area of expertise, again, the domain controller's expertise, to reach outside that tight network and authorize use to other pieces of infrastructure. So again, everything from infrastructure as a service, software as a service, remote workers who are not necessarily inside the premise anymore and have to sort of, painstakingly, connect themselves via VPN, which may or may not persist the connection for them at all times. All of these sorts of things complicated life. And there's one other variable I want to bring up here, actually two, but it's this whole new concept of device types. Let's face it, I bet you that a majority of people on this call are probably not on a Windows computing device right now. I would venture to guess that a Mac endpoint is probably what you're looking at this webinar through, and it likely is not necessarily bring your own MacBook. It's probably issued to you like your Windows workstation was in years past. It's just a changing of the guard. It's a commoditization of hardware, and what your employees are effectively, raising their hand that they want to use to be more productive. So this intrusion of Linux and Mac and everything that had occurred over the last 15 years and introducing their new faces of operating systems, again, caused a lot of distress to the standard issue Windows sort of sysadmin. So let's move forward. And now let's talk about Google's entree into the world over the last, let's say, 5 to 7 years, and what, again, I like to call Google's concept of a cloud-forward company. We're going to discuss that and it's essentially its way of showing a pristine view of how Google likes to see the world, at least from my perspective. When you look at a company, and this is I think my 5th startup, every startup prior to this one over the last 8 years, has been, generally speaking, a carbon copy from an IT infrastructure perspective. And what that looked like was an office space that was kind of cool, very little infrastructure. There is no concept of a server closet in any of these companies. Nothing lived on-prem. We have some wireless access points. Generally speaking, the executive staff, the sales people, the marketing people were on Mac endpoints. Our finance guy probably had a Windows machine, and most of our developers were running Linux on like Lenovo's or some other sort of instantiation of a Linux box and or Macs. Google, for these companies, at the center of everything. It gave us none of these guys that we hired knew anything about Microsoft Exchange, or they had never worked in Microsoft environments. What they were familiar with was setting up protocols. They were setting up Linux servers. They were very good at that infrastructure, and we're very cloud forward. They know how to reach into Amazon and manage our infrastructure, and they could help us as an organization get set up. So what do? You fire up a domain, you map that domain to Google, and then you collaborate because it's got all the tools in the box. And Google enabled this concept, not a direct analog, but it gave us a, quote, directory, at least a list of employees. And we could start to wrangle with OAuth and other kinds of protocols to sort of reach in and use the identity that Google gave us to log into services, be it a Salesforce but it was, or some cloud infrastructure, but it was kind of clumsy. And it's still to this day, unless you're a protocol expert and really know what you're doing with OAuth or OpenID, it makes things difficult. But as far as Google's concerned, it's a very effective means to have a single identity and at least get into the Google Apps, sort of domain of things. So when we look at this, it's if you're a small company, this is manna from heaven. This is almost, everything you need to at least start to put proposals together and start to code and get email and do all the things that, much larger companies sort of do on a daily basis. But you don't have to manage anything on-prem anymore, and you don't have to have a sysadmin waste their time babysitting infrastructure. Google, again, kind of showed us the light here in this regard. So remember just a few moments ago when I talked about the decentralization and all that chaos that was going on after, this sort of introduction of as-a-service sort of components? Well, let's look at that now in the context of a Google sort of oriented organization. We're going to look at that same sort of diagram. You have Google kind of at the core, and then your prototypical startup who has started this way starts to grow. There are 25 employees. There are 50 employees, 75, 100, 150, 200. These are people that I speak with every day, and they all reach the same exact conclusion at the same moment, and usually that moment is relating to sort of a bloat, an inflection in their business where they're rapidly hiring, and then they have that oh my God moment. We don't know how to manage Mac. We don't know how to manage, we have, this fleet of Windows. We kind of know what we're doing with Linux. I've got some applications that our company wants to use on-prem, but most of it lives up in the cloud. We have this scenario, like I know and I'm sure there's a bunch of red faces out there in webinar land right now. When I say this, I would venture to guess that a majority of you in some capacity are sharing a Wi-Fi secret because it's easy that way and everyone can just get on the network. You have sort of VPN that you're trying to access out in the world, and again, you have this decentralized view of the world. A Google identity is not able to be instantiated, emitted, pushed out to the other pieces of infrastructure that your IT team has to manage and make it count and make it secure. So this is where that moment of these IT folks start to pound their fist on the table. And what do? Well, I don't know, what does this really mean? Is it time for a directory? It's sort of like the speech to your 13-year-old, well, son, it's time to shave. Well, in companies that are maturing, well, son, it is time to grow up and think about harnessing all of those identities and think about centralization again. And let's talk about that a bit. So when we have, a decentralized world, what are the real core impacts and what are the considerations that these IT folks, directors, VPs of IT, VPs of infrastructure, et cetera, these are folks that both Eric and I speak to every day of our lives, and we hear this pattern over and over again. Let's talk about these impacts of decentralization. First, let's talk about security and compliancy. So you have Google at the center of things, and immediately you have simplicity in a very lightweight manner to some of the applications that counts. When you have Google as your centralized sort of, or at least your conceived centralized view of an identity. But you can't get it out to other things that really matter, like, let's say, an LDAP-backed application. What if let's say your IT team wants to ticket through Jira, Atlassian Jira, or some other similar, very robust enterprise application because you've grown up to that level. Well, not a great solution when you have to provision new accounts in a Jira and it's looking for an LDAP-backed directory, a traditional directory. Google falls down. Another major component of this is password enforcement. And companies that are growing, you can sort of set things inside of Google to manufacture some password, freshness and all that kind of stuff, but nothing really to harden it. They do a really, decent job on MFA, which is cool. But when it comes down to ensuring your employees are deeply disciplined, so to speak, on the management of their passwords, getting nudged to change them, making sure they're complex, ensuring that they never repeat passwords or utilize their username inside their passwords. And these are mistakes people make every day. There's nothing like that, and especially when that password needs to be, and frankly, the account managing the password needs to be used across lots of infrastructure. And we'll talk about that in a second. The next is, it has a very limited scope of, frankly, a myopic view on monitoring and alerting across infrastructure. What this boils down to is your company is then forced into much larger monitoring solutions that have to tether in a ton of different things, one endpoint being Google, in order to get a very robust view of intrusions and sort of anomalies that may be occurring within your network. Again, Google is only sort of concerned with itself and who logged in with your Google account from some machine. Pretty cool, but not when they're trying to brute force themselves into the machine itself. So you're sort of at a loss there. Another that I mentioned before is network authentication and access. And what this boils down to is something I mentioned just a few minutes ago. That being, you have this, again, this sort of cloud forward office. You have Cisco Meraki wireless access points hanging from your ceiling, probably duct tape up there because you're moving fast. And on the whiteboard in your conference room is the SSID of the endpoint and a secret that everyone can type in and share. And then you fire an employee. And then you have that moment where, yeah, you turned off their Google account, but they can still get access to the wireless. And frankly, depending upon their pay grade and what division they worked in, there may be a security surface that is widely left open just by virtue of them gaining access through that Wi-Fi because everyone's using the same password, and God knows when the last time it was refreshed. So the Google, again, it's not in its purview to help govern sort of Wi-Fi authentication. And lastly is sort of the wrapper to this. It's the centralization of the identity that ensures an effective offboarding process. This is the most forgotten about piece of importance that an IT person goes through. Onboarding, people pretty much have nailed. Like, you send out the offer letter, the new engineer or sales guy says, oh my God, this is great. I'm working at a startup, or even a large-scale company for that matter, which I've seen, and they get their Google account and they're fired up on Gmail, and they get a Salesforce account, and life is good, and they're cranking away. And then again, the guy goes crazy, and you need to let him go. So what happens? They shut down the Google account. But what about the myriad of other places that you have provided access to? Wi-Fi, various applications, their LDAP-backed accounts on certain applications, and even larger companies with multiple hundreds of employees. I've witnessed what I call the spreadsheet phenomena, that being an analog way to effectively review what you gave access to, from an employee-by-employee perspective, and then having to methodically fire up those systems, get into the admin dashboards of all these various applications, and start turning off accounts. Again, Google's pretty good at itself. It's pretty good at applications that can utilize OAuth, but everything else, all the other real stuff that matters, Google is effectively a large security hole for you to really be considering. So now, before I conclude, let's talk about the same problem space, but let's just go very deep, and we'll do this quickly, on machine endpoints. Again, if I go way back to the beginning, Active Directory, phenomenal mechanism to tether actual machines, Windows endpoints. They can kind of work with Mac, and Linux is a little bit more tougher. But again, this new world where Google is sort of at least the perceived center of the universe, there is no way to manage accounts, those centralized accounts on machines. So they have limited protocol support. For example, I mentioned this before, LDAP being one protocol. Microsoft does a very good job with itself for IWA, Integrated Windows Authentication, and Kerberos to sort of sign in from a machine and you kind of get access to stuff. It does all that well. Not in the modern world of sort of, again, Google-centrified organizations. There is no way to govern laptops. So then you have this siloed effect of user accounts, and it goes down like this. Again, an employee gets onboarded. An employee gets their Google account. Another IT guy then off Amazon orders, a bulk of Mac machines. They get delivered, and this poor guy is like sort of firing these laptops up, putting in user accounts, and then they hand the MacBook over to, the new employee. Here you go, high five, you're on your way. What's the big problem that I know you guys know? It's its own user account on that machine, and I will bet 99 out of 100 times that user account that was added by the IT guy is what? It's an admin on that box. Pretty cool if you're a small company and you trust everyone, but again, a glaring security hole for organizations that have security as their backbone, especially companies that are required to file compliance and regulatory sort of observations for PCI, HIPAA, etc. You have employees that are admins on those boxes. They're leaving backdoor accounts. They're effectively in control of most things on that machine, including the grabbing of any data. There is no policy enforcement, which is really the punchline here. There's no way to govern how those machines are controlled, not only from the moment of sign-in to making sure that there is a screensaver turned on, and that the employee after 3 minutes has to re-log into the machine. So with all that said, I want to give you my thanks for hearing me out. Again, we are a company that we're raising our hands as Google customers. We are incredibly productive, but at this moment, my takeaway for you, or hope what you are taking away is, all right, there are a ton of other surfaces that we really need to consider, starting with the centralization of an identity. And now, what I'd like to do is hand it over to Alan and then on to my good friend Erik Gustavson to talk about the remaining extremely important layers to identity centralization via SSO.
Thanks, Greg. Erik Gustavson. I got it now. Okay, but before we get to Erik, folks, I want to just take a quick moment. First of all, again, reminder for those of you who may have come in late, we do have a question section of the interface where you can type your questions in now if you have any, and we've set aside time for questions, and you can use that at any time. But right now, let's go on. We have a few polling questions here that we're going to go with, and Jules, if you want to launch the first question. How satisfied are you with Google Apps acting as your primary source of employee identity? If you could select one of the following, this isn't too hard. We'll just give you a couple of seconds here to vote. We'll give you another 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. And that closes it. And just real quickly, if we look at our answers, as I would suspect, a good chunk, more than 2/3 of you, we don't use Google Apps for work. You're new to Google. Of those who do, somewhat satisfied is about a quarter, and only 7% are unsatisfied. Okay, our next question. Jules, if we could go to our next question. What do you use for directory service? Select one of the following. AD, LDAP, no directory, or other. And again, we'll just give you 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And again, I think that this probably reflects the market in general. Almost 2/3 use Active Directory, about a quarter on LDAP. 10% of you use no directory. Wondering what's up with that. And then 3% have some other, or maybe they don't know what type of directory they use. That could be part of the no directories as well. All right, We have just one or two more polling questions here. Jules, if we can hit our next one. How many cloud apps do you think your organization is using? And I bet you this is going to be a surprise. But again, if you can start voting, and we'll just give you a few seconds. You're voting quicker. I guess you're getting used to the pace. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And we'll close voting. 0 to 15, 15 to 50. I bet you that's maybe what you think, but if you go back and check, I bet your organization is using 50 to 100 or 100 plus easily. When you start thinking about all the little apps that are on those phones and on your Macs and laptops out there. But you can see the answers here. And Jules, I think we do have one other polling question. What percentage of your employees use the same password across multiple corporate apps? Again, we'll allow you to vote. This is a scary one. And 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And survey says, as pretty much as I expected, more than 50% are using same password, and 61% of you voted on that. And unfortunately, I think that is the sad state of password usage today. Jules, is there one other polling question, or are we? I thought I might have seen one other one in there. Yeah? Okay. How many apps does your company use where multiple users share the same password, like a corporate social media account? Ooh, that's a dangerous one. And if you can vote, again, we'll just do it in a few seconds here, not to take up everyone's time. But I think it provides great insight. And 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And survey says 35% say none. Good for you guys. 41% say 1 through 5, and it goes more than 25. 8%. That's an accident waiting to, or maybe it's not an accident, it's an incident waiting to happen. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for taking the time on our polls. Before I hand things over to Eric, though, just another quick reminder, please ask questions, put them in the question section here of the website, and we'll be happy to get to them at the conclusion of the presentation today. With that being said, Greg, I think you're going to need to go into presentation mode to get back to our slide. Should be 17, and I will hand things off to Eric. Eric, you there?
I'm here. All right, Greg.
Fantastic.
Do I have control here? So
I should have just passed it, but let me do that again. Yeah, I see you as the controller. There you go.
okay, perfect. So I did the survey. All right. Hello, everyone. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the other aspects where Google's creates some amazing opportunities in the cloud, especially for the cloud-forward companies, but where there's some places where it falls down or falls short, I guess is a better way of saying that. So our little pithy title here. So single sign-on, it's cloudy with a chance of rain. So as Greg alluded to earlier, there's this beautiful picture of Google managing access to Drive and Gmail and Docs and other applications that can be integrated with it. But you know, the reality is there's a lot of applications out there that don't federate properly with Google for multiple reasons. Sometimes they're applications that your social media accounts, like your Twitters, your Facebooks, your Instagrams, which really aren't going to cede control over to Google because there's business reasons why they want to remain independent. You have developer-focused applications that aren't going to necessarily federate in that manner. You've got marketing-oriented applications like SurveyMonkey or Bitly that also aren't going to really have that same sort of Google plugin. The other aspect that we see every day is it's all well and good to have your IT group sit there and decide here's the applications used in the company. We just saw this in the polls of the number of applications that most people think they're using as a company. Our experience has been helping companies manage their cloud applications. The real number is about 5 times higher than that. And that's primarily driven by the fact that users are adopting their own apps outside of corporate control. So users will decide at a business unit level, I need access to a set of applications to get my job done. Well, guess what? Those users are going to go use those applications to get their job done, regardless of whatever corporate policy is in place, or even thinking about tying that back to your central identity in the system or to your corporate directory. So what we increasingly see is this mass adoption of cloud applications that's occurring within the cloud-forward organization and even within more traditional companies. And while you can tie some things back into Google, you can't tie everything back into it. And that leaves this big area. Some people will refer to this as shadow IT. Some people will talk about SaaS sprawl. There's lots of different terms used for this, but it's really the fact of the modern organization is that most applications live in the cloud, and most users are accessing a very large number of applications on a weekly basis. And those applications are largely going unmanaged within the corporate ecosystem. This also presents an operational challenge. Greg mentioned the offboarding problem of how do you keep track of who's using what applications. And you can think of this is the spreadsheet problem. How do I know what to get rid of when an employee leaves the company because I've been tracking it? But what happens when employees are adopting those applications on their own and not necessarily reporting that centrally? What happens when you want to bring a new employee on and for them to be effective at their job, they have to somehow discover on their own, outside of any IT or HR process, the applications that are required, what security protocols and processes are in place. I'm talking about the type of the HR and IT processes, the paper process, to make sure people have the right access, make sure people have the right access level, make sure password policies are being enforced, tying those applications back in. You know, the fact of the matter is that in the cloud forward company of today, you really have a decentralization of authority about who is able to provision an application to the company and who's able to access that application in the company. And that makes it very difficult to operate as you grow larger. And the problem just gets worse as you scale. Not only are there more and more applications appearing every day, it's kind of a part of the promise of SaaS solutions and cloud applications that you get specializations. You get more and more fine-grained applications that are very good at doing one or two things very well. Kind of the opposite you see in sort of the application suites that we've seen historically in computing and in IT and in the corporate world. You know, no longer are we looking at Microsoft Office being the dominant product and everything's really attaching to that. We're really seeing that there's a very large number of specialist operators, and those operators are being adopted by companies, and it becomes difficult to track who's using what. On top of that, it makes it very difficult to deal with sharing of access. So the poll about the corporate social media accounts, in order to effectively manage that, you can use a tool like a Hootsuite or something of that nature that can give you individualized access to an underlying application, but those apps don't always keep pace with the different types of social media accounts. Then you've got other applications, say for example certain administrative accounts or service accounts that you're needed for your operations, either in development, in your engineering department or your product department or your sales department, and understanding who's using those and how to share access is something that's really outside of what Google Apps can provide to the picture. So this sort of blind spot, Google's really good at managing applications that are directly tied into it and managing its own applications, but anything that falls outside that picture, which in reality is a large portion of what your employees are using, is going largely unmanaged. It's kind of building up in the corners, in the dark places inside the organization. And you know, it's kind of, as Alan kind of mentioned, it's an incident waiting to happen. The other aspect of this is you can't really control what you can't see. So those apps piling up in the dark corners are really having proper audit of who's accessing what applications from where, when, and with what credentials is really critical to understanding what's going on, especially if you're in a regulated industry, or especially if you're in a security forward or security conscious industry. You really need to understand what's going on inside the system. But you've got this centrifugal force pulling access control and pulling single sign-on away from IT and out into all the parts of the organization, which makes it really hard to get your hands around it. So how do you understand what's happening in the system? How do you know who's using what? How do you know that some employee is not aggregating privileged access to things? This is, if you think back to, this is the problem that the NSA had with Ed Snowden, is that he was going around and aggregating access to accounts, and no one knew that because there was no really audit trail or no way to detect that was happening. That same type of problem happens in cloud applications. You have employees who can aggregate privileges, and perhaps they're not going to be doing something malicious with that, but if there's a corporate security breach or an incident of some kind and that one employee's email address or email account is compromised, well, suddenly that attacker has access to a lot of privileged accounts. So managing your privileged accounts is really important here, and you can't manage what you can't see. So audit is the de facto foundation upon which you need to do your monitoring. So how do you handle increasing complexity? What does the cloud for company do? The solution here is what's rising in the industry is identity as a service. So in this place, identity as a service is really the complement to Google Apps. So this is the missing control panel. Identity is really what you're looking for to provide access to all the other applications Google doesn't manage, to allow you to make Google the source of corporate identity, so who you are as an employee can live in Google. That can be your directory, that can be authoritative, but that doesn't mean that Google is going to necessarily be the identity management platform. It is a source of identity, but that identity needs to be managed and needs to be unified throughout the cloud. So all your applications would need to understand or have a translation to what that application thinks of as identity, what that application thinks of as authentication and authorization, and that needs to be linked back to Google somehow, so that when Google says this user is no longer in the system or no longer an employee, or perhaps their roles somehow changed, they're in a different access group, that is then propagated out everywhere, both in the cloud as well as on-prem. And that's what Greg spoke of earlier in terms of this you have two sides of the problem. You have everything that lives outside of your boundary, and you have everything that lives inside the network that's physical. And both areas create problems, and both areas create friction. There we go. Okay, skip a slide here. Oh, lag on my end. So really, what do you do? Should you be focused on, you want to focus on the identity, not on the implementation. So you really want to worry about how does Google fit in with the applications, who should have access to what applications. You don't really want to worry about what's the actual protocol. And this, we talked a little bit earlier about how Google federates with applications. So they have OpenID Connect, they have SAML, they have lots of different ways you can connect up to applications. Not every application supports those methods for getting access to those applications, but largely because the phenomenon of organizational units and business end users adopting cloud applications, they're not thinking about how that ties back to corporate identity. They're not thinking about how that application fits into the security posture of the entire organization. They're thinking about, how do I pick this application? How do I get it up and running? How do I give it to the rest of my team? And how do I make use of it to accomplish my business objectives? And if they even think about IT and security, it's a second thought. The primary bit is how to make the business run. So it's really that, how do you then, as an IT department, create that agility that allows users to act like this and work like this, because that is what makes the business move forward, yet making sure that it's on top of a solid foundation. How do you create a path to security within the organization? And so when you bring in an identity solution, you really want to think about the identity, the access privileges, who has rights to what applications, what apps are in the system, and how you encourage users to self-register their applications. Once you can manage applications for the users, then the implementation details of how those apps are connected up, those can be modified over time. The details are no longer a complication for that end user. You don't want your head of sales or your head of marketing or your engineering team worrying about the exact single sign-on protocol being used. You want them to worry about who in their department should have access and who shouldn't. We want them to think about how you revoke access when that employee changes roles or leaves the company. That's where you want to focus on. You want to focus on the identity, not on the exact implementation of things. And this is, again, a place where Google gets you some of the way there, but not far enough. And sort of the last sort of area of advice is to think about how you give employees access to the right applications. Part of this is there needs to be a central place to register those applications. There needs to be a way to deprovision and provision applications in as automated fashion as possible. After all, if you're going through that hyper growth curve as a cloud forward company where you're adding 25, 50, 100, 150 employees, automation becomes really important here. So how do you give users access to those things? Google will give you access to the applications that are in the Google Apps Marketplace, and Google will give you access to the applications that Google themselves vends, but it's not going to give you a list of everything. So that's what your identity solution provides to you, and you want one that really plays well with Google. The identity solution will also give you the ability to understand how to provision and deprovision applications. So when someone leaves, knowing exactly what they're accessing, what credentials they had. And then build a report on that, report on activity and behavior and audit access. I think everyone's often been in that situation where not only is an employee left, but they've left and you didn't realize that they were in charge of something critical in the company, and now that you have to go dig up their email address or resurrect their account and send a password reset and figure out what they're accessing and then get in there and understand how it works. And that happens pretty frequently, and that's a drain on your business, and that's a friction that we have to overcome. So by having a way to understand what people are using, you can really make intelligent decisions at the point when the employee's leaving and they're transferring job roles, or you can decide about transitioning of accounts, or you can see what they're accessing so you can make intelligent decisions, make informed decisions, not just guessing or fighting fires after the fact. So at this point, I think we will open up for questions, and I'll hand it over to you, Alan.
Eric, thank you, Eric. That was great. Guys, I don't see any questions in our question queue here, though. I'm a little bit surprised after the level of presentation here. So I'm going to ask if any of you have any questions. No? Okay. Well, it would appear that we didn't really, I don't know, maybe we didn't stimulate the audience as much as we stimulated myself. Well, there's a number of ideas. Oh, okay. So here's a question from Scott, and this is probably aimed more at you, Eric. There are a number of ID as a service vendors, or identity as a service vendors. How would you contrast with Okta and some of the others?
I think all the identity as a service vendors really do a good job of the core identity function. So as an industry, we're a relatively young industry and really pushing for making identity as a service. And so that's really helping move forward the security stance. I think where we see a big difference in Bitium from our competitors like the Oktas and the OneLogins of the world, even Microsoft's own solutions, is really around ease of use and the flexibility of our system. We took a very unopinionated approach in terms of what corporate identity is going to look like. So treating Active Directory or JumpCloud or Google as authoritative into Bitium is a really easy thing to do, and that was intentional from day one. We didn't want to just build up on top of an Active Directory stack because we felt that was going to be cutting out what we saw as a cloud forward market. We ourselves use Google as our main identity source, and so we wanted to build a solution that would benefit the type of company that we were involved in, the type of company historically we've been at.
All right, this is Greg. I'll dovetail into that. I think the industry, or the market, if you want to just subcategorize right now, is in this sort of race to own the identity. As I like to say, it's a race to the center, where the center is sort of the single point of truth about someone's identity within an enterprise. And of course, Microsoft has their sort of vantage point on that. Google more or less does by proxy. And yet the thing that will reign supreme will be protocols. And they're, this is the difficult part because, when you're really trying to achieve this sort of utopian vision of, vendor neutrality, certain protocols works, amazingly effectively on one platform and are, sort of non-usable on the other side. So, I think, protocols are going to, again, play a huge role in sort of the unification. I think Google is playing a role there. Microsoft is somewhat, they're, I think, most interested right now in tethering, on-prem to their cloud versions of their infrastructure, be it Azure and Azure Active Directory, and of course Office 365. And rightly so. I mean, they have this sort of pristine stack, right? But that's just not what a huge majority of the world is using. So yeah, protocols.
Excellent. Okay, our next question. Is there a service catalog where we can decide which apps to offer as a service, or any solutions to data virtualization, big data, and BI?
Yeah, that's definitely an interesting question. From a SaaS application service catalog, that's always part of any identity as a service solution. So not only the applications that are pre-integrated. So, for example, at Bitium, we've got over 5,000 applications integrated into our app catalog. But then once you're within the company and using it, there's the applications that the company is registered. So that creates a second catalog of apps that are in use as well. Where that fits into big data or other sort of analytical applications that are more running as platform as a service type solutions. That's usually done through different mechanisms in terms of how you discover use those applications.
Right.
Greg, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, we see this quite often, mainly when you have infrastructure as a service, perhaps some Hadoop instance or infrastructure that is managing and computing large-scale data sets. Interestingly, it becomes an effort of privileged account management, meaning, how does the identity, like who services the identity to access that stuff? So the first layer in is just those that can work on the computations themselves and the software that's running the computations, again, Hadoop, MapR, et cetera, et cetera. The other are the applications that slave from that, perhaps it's a marketing person that needs to sift through voluminous clickstream data that Hadoop is serving up. That's the application layer, and there are other protocols that serve that. So it's a very complicated question that we're not going to sort of, solve right now. But again, it is just part and parcel with the need for centralizing an identity to go through each and every one of those layers.
Sounds like a great topic for another webinar.
Yeah.
Okay. Guys, I don't have any other questions here. So if that's it, this is Alan Schimmel. I want to thank both Erik and Greg for excellent presentations. I hope our audience enjoyed it. We will have the video and slides up within 24 to 48 hours on DevOps.com. And I think we're going to call it a wrap. This is Alan Schimmel for DevOps.com. Greg, Erik, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you all.
Cheers,
okay,
Alan.
everyone.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Bye.